There we go. Session is being recorded. Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you. Well, good morning from me, Daniel, in Chicagoland. I know we had some of the people from all over the place. Thank you for coming out and joining us on the Adobe CF Summit online version. Let me just get started here. Let me share my screen. Oh, you don't need to see that. Not yet, anyway. And let me pull the chat up so I can see the chat. If anyone has any comments, hopefully everyone can see my screen okay. I'm going to take that as a yes, and we're just going to go with it. Thanks, Dan. Oh, well, we'll deal with that. Anyway, so good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. If you were able to join us in Vegas for CF Summit, thank you for coming out there. If you weren't able to thank you for coming today. I appreciate your support, and we're going to get going here. So this is a session I gave in Summit last October called Easier API Development and Testing. Use PostMan, Webhook.site, and ngrok to enhance your workflow. So let's get going. So first of all, who am I? My name is Daniel Garcia. That's me. I am a senior developer at Ortus Solutions. I help co-host the Modernize or Die podcast. It's a weekly podcast that Ortus Solutions puts out there with news of Code Fusion, CFML, and all sorts of cool things. I've been using Code Fusion since 1999, since it was Alaire, and then through all the different iterations. I'm a cinephile, which means I love movies. I am a regaler of useless knowledge, which means I love trivia. And I am a part-time non-traditional grad student at New Mexico State University. Go Aggies! Woo! Actually, I just finished up college last month, and I'm starting grad school next week. So a little excited, intimidated, but we'll figure it out. So a little bit of shameless self-promotion because I can. Ortus Solutions, ortussolutions.com. We are the makers of ColdBox, CommandBox, really all things box, an enterprise level framework that solves a lot of problems and things you want to do in Code Fusion. Check us out, ortussolutions.com. Also, another shout out to ortussolutions.com/podcast. This is the Modernize or Die podcast. I'm on the CFMO News Edition. You'll probably catch me once or twice a month or so, depending on schedules. We have different co-hosts that are rotated in and out. But come check us out. And one more shameless self-promotion because I can. I started a YouTube channel last year. I haven't done much, but grilling and smoking and more with Daniel. I'm Daniel. Please like and subscribe on YouTube. And also, I have a radio show on Tune In Sunday nights to Pop Tracks with DJ Jenny G. That's me on mastersradio.com. So anyway, just some fun stuff we started doing last year and thought I'd throw it in there because, why not? So when I first started putting this presentation together, I had just watched the movie Up in the Air, which if you haven't seen it, it's a great movie with George Clooney and Anna Kendrick. I don't want to give too much away on it, but if you've seen it, it's a great movie. But in the movie, George Clooney character plays a motivational speaker. And one of the things he talks about is what's in your backpack when you move around. And so a quote from the movie is, "The moving is living, the slower we move, the faster we die." Kind of feel that way about development too, right? Sometimes you get in a rut, the slower we develop, the more behind we get, the harder it is to catch up sometimes. So it just kind of spoke to me. So what's in your dev backpack? It came from a play on what he was doing in the movie and what's in your backpack. So he will not be appearing in the Vista room at 5:30, although this would make that presentation so much cooler if George was here. We're here. So today, the goal is to find at least one new tool or feature that you find useful. Just one. I don't have a high bar here. Just want you to find something that's useful. Hopefully you'll find more than one, but let's shoot for one. So what is in your dev backpack? Well, what's in my dev backpack is PostMan, Webhook.site, and ngrok. And we're going to talk about these three tools today. I'm going to do a demo and show you some of the cool features and why, if you're not using them already, why you should start looking at them. And if you aren't using them, maybe something you haven't noticed about them. Some cool features. So PostMan It's a cross-platform API testing tool with lots of awesome features. Allows you to test different APIs, it allows you to test with different verbs, all sorts of cool things. I know there are other REST clients out there, but Postman, in my opinion, is probably one of the best. Webhook.site, you can easily inspect, test, and automate any incoming requests or emails. In a nutshell, you can just make a request to your custom URL that they give you and see what the result is. If you're making API calls, you can call that instead of whatever, and you can see what's there. It's really cool and very handy for debugging. And then finally, ngrok allows you to expose a web server or really any server running on your local machine to the internet. So you've got something running locally, you want to share it with somebody, but it's a hassle to set up firewall rules or deployments, whatever. Spin up ngrok, create a tunnel, and just share it. It's that simple. So let's start out. Make an API call, they said. It'll be easy, they said. This is my cat meme because all those years of watching Raymond Camden do presentations, I think he always had cat memes. I thought, if I was ever going to do one, I want a cat meme. So there you go. So Postman, it's a cross-platform API testing tool with lots of awesome features. So why Postman? Basic version is free. I like free. You like free. We all like free. If it's free, I'll take 2. It's free. It makes it easy to test API calls. It's free and it's easy. What more do you want? Well, some of you want lots more, but it's free. It's easy. It runs on many different platforms and even through a browser. So whether or not you're on Windows or a Mac or Linux or just a browser, you can use Postman. It's that cool. You can also export requests and share with others. So if you're building up a collection and you're testing an API and you want to give it to your coworker, you can do that. If you subscribe, you can even have team collaboration features. So you can make a shared collection and you can both test from it. I do that with clients all the time. Makes it very easy to develop and collaborate. So some of the basic features, you can make HTTP requests with all the different verbs and payloads. So I know most of you are all familiar with gets and posts. That's pretty standard for web pages, but there's a ton of other verbs that you can use. Deletes, puts, options, patch, others, things I'd not even heard about until I started using Postman. But you can do it with Postman. You can make all those different types of requests. You can send headers, URLs, form values, raw data. I think you can send binary as well. You can really use it to send whatever you need to send to that remote or to that API. You can see what's being returned, including headers and payloads. Sometimes you're testing a public API or any API for that matter, and headers matter. Status codes matter. You can see all that with Postman. Try it out with Postman before you develop because you can see what you're getting. You can save off the different responses as well, so you can refer to them later or share them with others. If I'm testing this API and I want to see what my payload is back, I can do that in Postman. Now I've got a working example that I can then code from. And then as mentioned, you can create request collections for sharing or reuse. So all that is free. You can do that in the basic version, as well as generate documentation. As you're building out your collection, if you're marking it up and saving examples, you can generate documentation from what you have and share that with other people as well. If you don't want to go into your APIs and document it that way, or maybe you can't document it because it's a vendor API, do it in Postman. Put your own notes and stuff. Share it with your team. Have documentation. Documentation is good. If you know anything about Order Solutions, you know that we're a documentation first company. We're also a testing first company. We're a lot of things first company, a modern company as well. So, but documentation, it's good. So some of the advanced features, you can write tests, because I know we all write tests, right? Okay, well, we've all thought about writing. Okay, we've all heard about writing tests. Well, in Postman, you can also write tests. If I call this API with this input, I'm expecting this response. Write a test to see that I get that response. And if I don't get that response, that's a fail, and you want to know that. You can do some of that in Postman. If you're a quick plug, if you're using ColdBox, you can use TestBox and write tests, but that's beside the point. Postman, write tests. You can run a collection as a whole. If I've got a collection with, say, 10 different requests, I can run that as a batch collection and just test everything in there. So if I've got tests running in each request, I can just see all the results. That's also a pretty sneaky way of If you've got to say seed a remote database with a bunch of values from Postman, and you've got them all in your request, just run them all and maybe just creates a bunch of posts and creates data as well. I've seen people do that. There's probably better ways of doing that, but that is something that you can do as well. You can create environments and variables to use in requests. So, for example, you can specify different API URL by environment. So, if I've got a local dev and I've got a shared dev and I've got a staging server and a production server, and all these different servers, they're all going to use the same API calls, but I can create different environments with different URLs and credentials per server. So I can easily toggle back and forth between what I want to test. I want to test it locally, it works fine. Now let me test it in dev and it doesn't work. Well, hey, I can test that very easily. You can mock APIs. This is not something I do a lot of, but say you're working with a front end group and you haven't written your APIs yet, but you know what the payload is going to look like. You can create a mock API, save the example off with that payload, give it to your front end people and say, hey, look, call this mock API and it's going to give you what I'm going to give you later. And they can be productive and write the front end stuff. Allows you just to kind of share stuff in advance. Very handy. It's really an API platform that can do a whole lot more. So why you should use Postman. Makes API testing simple. No more writing file dumps and code. In the old way I would do things, I'd make an API call, want to know what's going on, I'd have to write a file dump and then go look at that dump and see with my outputs what's going on and blah, blah, blah. Well, now I can also just do a dump and have it shared to the screen because Postman has a viewer that you can render HTML. So if you're doing your CodeFusion CF dump, that'll come through and you can just see it right in Postman. It's very handy. You can view all aspects of the calls from headers to content. You could test authenticating APIs. So this is really cool too. Say you have to deal with an API call from a vendor or a third party and they give you credentials. Well, before you start coding anything, use Postman and just try making test calls. You got your credentials, make the call, see if it works. Don't go down a rabbit hole of, is it my CodeFusion code that's not working? Is it something else that's not working? What's going on? Validate it with Postman first. Make sure that you can connect and that you're getting what you expect to get. And it's easy to export and share requests. So again, with your team members, you can do that. And Gerard in the chat says, yep, it's good for OAuth APIs. Absolutely, Gerard. Thank you. So moving on, the next tool. Back in my days, it was called callback URLs, not webhooks. And that's true. Back in my day, it was a callback URL, but I think a callback URL is just a webhook. So Webhook.site. That's the address for it, Webhook.site. You can easily inspect, test, and automate any HTTP request or emails. It's very cool. So why Webhook.site? Basic version is free. I love free. You love free. We all love free. If it's free, I'll take two. It's free. Love it. We're developers. We love free things. You do have a 500 request maximum URL, but that's okay. If you run out, generate another URL. It's free. Create new ones as needed. It's very easy to use. It's free and it's easy. What more do you want? Coding's hard. Your tools should be easy. Well, coding's hard for some of us. Some people I know, coding's very easy, but for some of us, coding can be hard. So your tooling should be easy. It lets you inspect any incoming HTTP request or email. So if I make a request to my custom webhook.site URL, I can see what's there from headers I sent to cookies I sent to payloads. I can see everything. Maybe I'm making an API call to somebody and I'm not sending what I think I'm sending. Well, I can sanity check it with this. Just make a request to your custom URL or email, and you can view the result in their web interface. I'm going to do a demo of this stuff in a little bit. So some of the basic features. You can send a request and inspect the headers and payloads. So I can send that and see what's actually being sent. I can send an email and inspect headers and content. Now, not a lot of people need to worry about this, but if you do, why is this email coming through as expected? Well, let me send an email and I can actually see the raw stuff coming through. Maybe it's something weird in the encoding. Maybe it's something weird with an attachment. It gives you some insights on things you can test. You can view the results in a browser. Makes it very simple. You don't have to install anything. You just make a request somewhere and view the results. You can share that with others as well. But do not send private data with the free version. It's free. In fact, I probably wouldn't send private data with any version, just as a general, tinfoil hat. Just my tinfoil hat. You're trusting third-party companies with privacy, and they probably make best practices to do it well. But as a general rule, if you don't need to send it, don't send it. Send fake data. So advanced features. You can set passwords on results. So if I want to share this with my team members, but I want to at least give some sort of protection, I can set a password so not just anybody can see it. You can export requests. So if I'm making these calls and I want to see what I'm getting, I can export the request and save it for later. You could get a custom alias for a request. So instead of the random URL they're giving you, you could do something a little more personalized, or have non-expiring URLs, or even unlimited requests and URLs. But guess what? It requires a subscription for advanced features, which is fine because they give you so much stuff for free. And if this solves problems and saves you how many hours a month or a week using it, subscribe to it. It's not that expensive. Support them. But if you don't need to, you still got a lot for free. So why you should use Webhook.site. Makes testing requests and emails simple. We like simple. You can quickly see what your request is doing. You can view all aspects of the call from headers to content. You can receive webhooks when developing, and you don't have to expose your local environment to confirm the data. So, for example, if you've ever worked with Twilio, you can send text messages and other cool things with Twilio. But if you're sending a text message, Twilio will send a callback to you with the response. Well, if you're testing them out, set up a webhook.site URL as your callback URL for Twilio. And when you make that text, you can see what Twilio is going to send you. You can see how it all works before you even do anything. And that's something I've done before with Twilio and others. Fire up webhook.site URLs, let them post to that, and confirm that the workflow is working the way you expect. And you can share results with others. So, moving on. Firewall issue. Tell me more. This is Willy Wonka. It's a movie I love. Gene Wilder, great actor. So, ngrok. You can expose a web server running on your local machine to the internet. And I say web server, really it's any server. It doesn't have to be a web server. But most of us, it's web servers that we deal with. So, web. So, why ngrok? Basic version is free. Everybody, I like free. You like free. We all like free. If it's free, I'll take two. This was more exciting in person in Vegas when I did this because the crowd was getting into it. It's kind of weird talking to myself, but that's okay. I'm going to imagine everyone in the chat repeating it with me. Free. We love it. Allows you to open a tunnel to your machine. So if I'm sitting here, I can open a tunnel to the outside world and somebody can come in to my machine. It's awesome. How cool is that? And thank you for cheering, Dan. I know you're cheering. You can run it from the command line. Don't be scared about the command line. It's very simple. It's just one command. And if you add it to your path, you can access it from any command line folder, any directory. It has a cool dashboard where you can see the requests coming in, and you can even replay requests too. So think of ngrok kind of like a little intermediate proxy where it opens a tunnel, receives the request, and then relays it to whatever your local service is running. And if you've got requests coming in, especially on the web, you can replay those requests. And why is that important? Maybe you're testing an API call you're hosting locally, and you could just keep clicking the replay and have it keep making the same request. You could debug or do whatever. So as you can imagine, there might be some security risks. I see security risks everywhere. So a big ngrok caveat. That's just a fancy word for saying danger, warning. This pokes a hole through your network and can upset your infrastructure people. I'm going to repeat that so you know how serious this could be. This pokes a hole through your network and can upset your infrastructure people. Obviously, if you're working from home or a solo developer or whatever, no big deal. You're your own infrastructure people and you're fine. But if you work for an enterprise company that's got lots of IT security and layers, yeah. So if they are strict, maybe let them know before they show up at your desk, ask you what you're doing. It's actually happened to me. Actually happened to a former coworker of mine, where we were testing. He was working with Twilio, was testing the webhook callbacks, and he got permission, but to use ngrok. But he spun it up, was doing his testing, everything was fine. And 10 minutes later, infrastructure shows up and said, "Hey, what are you doing? Why are you bypassing our network security? What's going on? What is this tool? What is going on?" Um, so it was all good, except he got permission. It was fine. It was just kind of cool to see our infrastructure people were on top of it, and it's not something we even thought about. But yeah, it pokes holes. So use good judgment and remember to turn it off. When you're done with it, turn it off. Although some companies do use this in production environments, which is fine. But what I'm saying is if you're using this for one-off testing, turn it off. So some of the basic features. Is he former because they're no, he's not former. He's former because I moved on and came to work with you, Dan. Yay. So you can create HTTP TCP tunnels on random URLs and ports. So it's not really just for web servers. It's really any port. As an example, I was working with a client where I had a copy of their database. We're developing some stuff. I was having some issues with something. It wasn't working. He couldn't reproduce it. I spun up ngrok, gave him an account to come into my SQL server and let him just see what's going on. We found the issue. It was a config issue. I didn't have an update that he had, and we hadn't shared it, whatever. But it was that simple. It took me longer to get him set up in the database to come tunnel in than it was for me to spin up ngrok. Very cool. It's a public connection to your local server. It monitors connections to the site and gives you a little internal web server that you can run to see all the different requests coming in. And then there's a little replay button. That's I was saying, if you're making API requests to your internal API and you're testing things, you want to just keep testing it, you could do that. It makes it very easy. You don't have to wait for that other person. Say it's another person making the API call away from you. You can just keep replaying it yourself without having to bother them. And you can also set some auth credentials to protect access to your tunnel. It supports basic auth. In the more advanced features, it also supports OAuth. I haven't done it, but I've seen demos where you can easily connect it to Google authentication and just use Google to authenticate all your requests. It's very cool. I saw a demo last fall of that. So some of the advanced features, you can reserve ngrok.io subdomains. So instead of the random URL they give you, you can read something more, personalized to you. Or you can even set a custom ngrok subdomain. Even more. Tunnel.mydomain.com can just CNAME over to it. Makes it easy to share with people. It has increased limits for connections. And you can implement end-to-end TLS tunnels for your SSL. Something I haven't really dealt with because most of the time I use ngrok, it's for one-off developing and sharing and things like that. But you can do it. But with anything, it requires subscriptions for advanced features. So if you like the tool, it saves you time, it saves you hours. It's not that expensive to get an account. Support them. It's a cool tool. It's like anything, right? Cool when you need it. But so yeah. So why you should use ngrok? You can demo websites without deploying. How many times you've been working with the client? And let's tweak this, let's tweak that, let's do this, let's do that. Okay, let me make that change and wait 5 minutes for it to deploy, or a few minutes for whatever. I don't know what your deployment process is, but with ngrok, I can make the change, save it, and immediately have them test it. You can do a lot of interactive collaboration very quickly. Or if you're working on that demo website, you're not ready to publish it yet, you can use ngrok to show it off. As I mentioned earlier, it's very helpful for setting up webhook callbacks, both on your local machines or on your dev servers. So say you've got, not just locally you're developing, but on your dev server. You're working with Twilio and you want to make sure the whole thing works. You can set up ngrok on your dev server to accept those requests in that environment from Twilio. Why not? You got a UAT server or a QA server, do it there too. You can do it wherever. Maybe production's the only public-facing URL, that's fine, but all the other environments, use ngrok to set up that workflow, enable that workflow. You could test mobile apps connected to your local backend. I've not done this yet, but if you've got your ngrok server running to your machine and you've got your API in your mobile app, use your ngrok URL, and now you're interacting on your mobile app on your phone with what's running in your computer. How cool is that? No deploying, no waiting, no whatever. I need to tweak something. This isn't working. Let me just tweak it and check it. Very cool, very easy to use. And you can mention, you can inspect and replay web requests. So again, maybe you're doing the mobile thing and hey, why isn't this working? Well, I can keep replaying it without having to go back to my mobile app and set up the scenario again. So you get a demo and you get a demo and we all get demos and I get a sip of coffee. Hopefully everyone is still there. I can't really tell. I'm just going to assume there's even more people because, why not? Oops. We're not to yet there. So first thing I'm going to show you is we're going to start. I'm going to do a demo. I'm going to show off PostMan, Webhook.site, ngrok. So starting out with PostMan. First thing, postman.com. Go to the site. You can download it right here. If you got Windows, if you've got a Mac or Linux, set up, download it, install it. Postman.com. And there's tons of information, documentation, all sorts of things you can use. Like I said, this is really it's an API platform. There's tons of stuff you can do. I'm only touching on the very, beginner stuff just to get you useful with it. So that being said, let me pull up Postman. Okay, so when you come into Postman, you've got workspaces. We're going to deal with pretty much workspaces. I've got a conference workspace set up. And in there, you've got different sections, collections, APIs, environments, et cetera, Most of us are going to use collections. So collections are really just the requests that you make. This is where you can set up all the different requests you want to make. You can create different collections. You can make different folders in collections, organize it, however you need to organize it. And then if you need to share it with somebody, it's easy to export that. APIs, I don't actually use that. But environments, I do use. So environments you can set up with all these different environment variables that you can then reference within your collection. So therefore, as you're changing environment to environment, right now I only have the one environment, these values will dynamically change. So if I had, say, local and production with the same variables, if I toggle, that'll change the values. So just really quick here, if I go to this get a joke API, you notice the mustache notation, joke API. If I hover over it, you can see the value that's there. v2.jokeapi.dev. It's an environment variable. If I go back to my environment local, it's right here. So you can kind of easily see how you can set up these values and store them so they could be reusable. Environments, very powerful stuff. You can mock server, which I don't do a lot of. I'll try and show a demo of it later. But yeah. So let's get started. So I've got a jokeapi.dev. As mentioned, that's v2.jokeapi.dev. I'm going to make a request. This is a live request. I set a few query parameters, what to filter out. So this is a family show. We don't want anything crazy. Just one joke and returning me back one record. So right away, I can see that here is the payload that got returned to me. JSON structure, there's no errors, there's a category. The joke, 2 SQL tables sit at the bar. A query approaches and asks, can I join you? Nice. If I make that call again, I'm going to get a different joke. A guy walks into a bar and asks for 1.4 root beers. The bartender says, I have to charge you extra. That's a root beer float. The guy says, in that case, better make it a double. I'm imagining everybody in the chat room just laughing right now at this geek humor. Anyway, you can see the payload. Or if you want to see it raw, they do a nice job of trying to pretty it up. I can see what cookies were sent back. In this case, there were no cookies. I can see the status code that was sent back. In this case, was 200 as expected. It took 385 milliseconds and only 1.88 kilobytes in response. I can see all the different headers that were sent back. A lot of the stuff you don't care about, but some of the stuff you might care about. And if you do, it's in here. Ooh, server, Cloudflare. And I'm not going to talk about tests just yet. So within your request, if you needed to do authorizations, you can set up your credentials in there. If you need to set custom headers, you could do that. If you need to set a body, you could do that. You can also do some test stuff, which I'll get to in a little bit. But that's the basic part of ngrok. If I wanted to just go to, it's just a client. I can just call adobe.com and then look, here's my raw data. It's HTML for the website. If I click preview, it'll render it. Oh, there's probably a lot of stuff for it to render. So maybe that was a bad idea. But anyway, you can kind of see how that could work. Just whatever you want. You get all your different verbs: get, post, put, patch, delete, copy, head, options, link, unlink, purge, lock, unlock, prop, find, and view. I don't use most of these. I use most of the CRUD ones: get, post, put, delete, and sometimes patch, sometimes head. But they've got them there if you need them. I don't want to save that. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and make one more call. Programmer puts 2 glasses on his bedside table before going to sleep. A full one in case he gets thirsty, and an empty one in case he doesn't. Perfect. I'm going to save this as a response. Save it as an example. I'm just going to call it whatever I want to call it. You can call it whatever you want to call it. Binary joke. There we go. That's saved. So now I come back to it, and I wanted to see the details of that request. I can see what I used to create that request. I can see all the different headers, things like that. Very easy to save off requests. So if you're testing APIs and you want to see what you're getting back, say you've got an API you're testing 5 different ways and you need to save off 5 different responses, well, save them off as results. And then now you've got your JSON that you can work with and copy over to your development and consume it. You've got something you can work with, or if you're writing tests, you've got test data you can use. And then I'm going to call the same API, and this time I'm going to get 3 jokes. And now it's still 200. It took a little longer. It's a little bigger payload. Have a great weekend. I hope your code behaves the same on Monday as it did on Friday. Yeah. Debugging is like being the detective in a crime movie where you're also the murderer at the same time. I love that one. That comes up. Algorithm, a word used by programmers when they don't want to explain how their code works. Yeah, I'm not going to say I've never used that before, but I'm also not going to say that I've never not used that before. Anyway, it's just a fun API if you're testing things out. Okay, so now I mentioned about tests. I'm back to the Get a Joke API. If I come over here to tests, you're going to see I wrote some very simple tests here. So the first test, I'm testing that the status code is 200. If my request returns a status code of 200, that test is going to pass. Then I'm also writing a test to say the body includes the word joke. And so when I look for the body, I'm looking for the word joke. If it finds it, it passes. And then I'm also testing that the error value is false right here. So I'm testing the status code, a keyword in the response, or I'm testing a specific value in the response. And so then if I click here, guess what? They all pass. Say I want to pretend and say, well, no, not 500, not 200, but 500. And guess what? That test is going to fail. because I said it should be a 200, but I said it should be a 500, but really got to be a 200. So again, these are very simple ways that you can write tests for your. Could you zoom the screen share a little bit? Is that better? Hopefully. Cool. Sorry about that. I'm sitting really close, so it all looks huge to me. But okay, so again, you can have your simple assertions and your responses. And if you look over here on the right, they've got a lot of snippets that you can use to build your test. So status code is 200. Boom, that's the start of my test. Yes, I love PostMan too. So you don't have to be a testing wizard. They give you a lot of things to work with. And PM stands for Postman, Test, and so forth. In fact, a cool thing that I do, if I'm working, I don't have a demo of it here, but if I'm working with an API that's got, say, authentication and JOT tokens, I'll have an authentication, a login API or login request hits the API, and then as it returns my JOT token to the payload, I'll have a test that'll take that token value and save it to an environment variable. And then all my other requests just use that environment variable in my header to automatically send the authentication. So if I'm going to be testing a bunch of API calls that are all authenticated, I authenticate initially, save off that value dynamically, and then use it for all the rest of my calls. Makes it very easy to do things. Yep. So anyway, going through, I showed you the tests. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, we can export the collection. 2.1 is, I don't know the difference in the formats, but use the latest because it's recommended. I'm going to go ahead and save it off. And then if I pull that up, you'll see that the collection is just JSON. You can send that, it's a text file, it's JSON. You can send it to somebody else, and they can easily import it into their Postman. And what's even cooler, if I just go, I'm not going to do it because, I don't want to overwrite mine. Well, maybe I can. Yeah, I don't want to import it because I don't want to mess up my demo. Oh, import as a copy. Look at that. Postman has your back. So there we go. I just imported my collection. And it's even got my environment variable references and everything else. So it's very easy for you to import or export and then import and share. And now I want it out of here. And it's also cool because this is just JSON. If you want to, you save that export into your version control. So that way you want to share it with others. I build up my whole request collection. Let me export it, throw it into Git, share it. They pull down Git, they can import it. Now you're able to share easily with everyone on your team that pulls your Git repo. Or if you've got a public project, you want to share it with the public. It's easy to do stuff like that. Yeah. Okay. I showed that. Okay. And the last thing I kind of want to show here is if you click the little dots, you see there's tons of stuff you can do. One of them is view documentation. Now, it'll generate documentation that you could about the request. So it's going to show me the URL. You notice how it translated it from the environment variable. The flags I use, the request, whether you want to do curl or something else. Shows you the response because these are the examples I saved off. Multiple jokes, shows all that stuff. And then if I want to publish it, oops, let me get it to the correct browser. If I want to publish it, I can go to Postman with it. And then I can publish it. And now I can share that with all of you. And you can see my, in fact, I'm going to paste this into the chat, but I'm going to delete it very soon. Where you can see, you can just share your own with somebody. It's that easy. Actually, I'll leave that up there for now. But if you want to unpublish it, you can unpublish it. And if you've got probably an advanced account, you can even put a password on it. But there we go. So that's Postman. Okay, next I want to show how you can mock a collection. So this example, using the Postman echo command, I'm going to call it, and it's just going to send me some stuff back. Basically, what I sent in was test 1, 2, 3. It's going to return test 1, 2, 3. It's just a way to mock something up. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and mock collection. We're going to call this test mock. It's not something I do a lot of, so I apologize if I'm stumbling a little bit. But so I'm going to call it test mock. It's going to do that. I'm going to save the mock server as a new environment variable because I don't want to mess with my local stuff. And I'm going to go ahead and create that mock server. So now I've got a new mock server. If I go to environments, look, I've got a test mock environment now that has values. So if I go back to my collection, if I look at URL, it's going to say unresolved. If you can guess, it's because I'm in the wrong environment. Got to go up here and switch to my test mock environment. And now that renders, and now I can actually send and get my request back. So this is a way that you could actually dummy up some data, give it to your front-end people, allow them to do things with it. And if I go here, I can see the requests that were made. So if your front-end people are like, hey, it doesn't work, you can come in here and say, look, I'm refreshing my logs. I don't see the request you made. So anyway, it's a cool feature. I don't really use it much, but I can see how it can be pretty powerful. Okay, moving on, because I'm talking way too much. So Webhook.site. So if you go to Webhook.site, right away, it's just going to come up. It's going to give you your URL. It's going to give you a custom email, give you all sorts of cool things you can use. Actually, let me pull up mine. Here we go. This is the one I set up beforehand. So look, I've got a custom URL. If I copy that, I'm going to go to Postman, go to my local environment, and I'm going to paste that in there. So now I am ready to call that API. I'm going to go ahead and save that. Also, you'll notice that I've got an email address here. I'm going to go ahead and send a test to that. So I already have my email client open and over the screen. So I sent that email to that test address. And let's see what happens. Let me move on with the demo, but we'll see what happens in a minute. So going back to Postman, go to my collection. I got my Webhook.site demo. I'm going to do a GET request. It's undefined because I'm in the wrong environment. Switch to local. Quick thing, working with environments, always make sure you save. I don't know how many times I've changed something, tested it, and I forgot to save and it didn't work. And just remember to save often. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and I'm in my environment. You can now see my URL. I'm going to send it. Success. So I go back to here. Oh, looky, I got my email that came in that I sent a minute ago. It came from, it passed most of my verification checks. You can kind of see a bunch of header stuff that you may or may not care about. Greetings, program. That's what I sent in the email, and props if any of you get that reference. And then just the raw content that came through. So you may not care about this stuff, but some of you might, and it's really cool that they offer that, and it's free. Postman version number. You know what? I'm using the latest and greatest Postman. I don't know what version number it is. 10.7.1 on Windows. What's Webhook actually for? It's like a dummy content. Yeah, it's basically, think of it like a externally hosted site that you can just send requests to. So in this case, I made a Postman request to it. It was a GET request. There's my URL, and I just called it. Pretty simple. But now let me go through and send a post request with a body with my name. I'm going to send a put request with an environment variable. I don't know why it's taking so long. Usually it's pretty quick. This success I'm getting back, I actually generated that. I was able to put that into Webhook.site so that I'm getting something I expect back. Oh, I'm getting a bad gateway. And is that because they're having problems? Let's check. Just making an options call. There we go. So why did the delete work? There we go. So they must have just had a hiccup. It is the internet, right? So if I go back here, now all of a sudden you can see all my requests. Here's my post. Here's my raw content. Name, Daniel Garcia. You see everything about that request. Here's a put. My raw content, conference equals conference. Bang. You can see that request. You see my options call. You can see my delete. I deleted COVID. You're welcome. So this is just a way that it's just a tool, right? These are all tools. This becomes particularly useful, like I mentioned before. If I'm working with Twilio, I make a Twilio call and I specify this URL as my callback URL. I can see what Twilio sends me. And then I can test, hey, this actually works. Woohoo. Or I ran into a issue in the past where I had an API. I was supposed to be pushing content to a client, and they kept saying they weren't getting what they thought I was sending. So I ended up sending it to here, and sure enough, it was an issue because their API was calling for us to use the get verb, but send a body. Well, you can't do that with just regular Cold Fusion. So I had to go and I don't even know if it's standard RFC, whatever, but I found out, hey, I'm using my CF HTTP and I'm sending it here. It's all here. Why aren't you getting it? Well, Webhook.site confirmed it wasn't coming through. And then I had to go through and come up with some workarounds and things like that because this API was wanting things the non-standard way ish. But so yeah. And as I mentioned before, you can edit your return response. So I've got my text JSON, and this is actually what I've got set back. And this is a special value request header Postman token. So it's going to return whatever Postman sends. It's just a way to make a dynamic demo. And so here, I'm going to go ahead and delete all my requests. I'm starting over. And so now if I go back to Postman, and I want to run this entire collection, I'm going to do that. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 requests. I'm going to run it. I'm going to run it, say 2 times. Why not? And we're going to let it run. Oh, I just knocked over my screen. Sorry, I got a green screen behind me. I just knocked it over. So yay, live demos. Okay, so here I went ahead and ran that collection twice. And so if I go into my my test results, where'd it go? I lost it. Sorry, I got distracted with the live demo thing. Oh, here we go. So if I look at all my tests, most of them passed. And the 2 that failed are the ones that I failed on purpose. I said I wanted it to be 500. It was really a 200. So that should be a fail. And because they ran this whole iteration twice, I've got 2 fails. So you can kind of see how it's easy to run those things. And if I go into my results, and now I've got all those requests. So that's Webhook.site. Okay. I got to get cooking here. So let's keep going. So moving on, we're going to go look at ngrok. And if you don't use command box, use command box. I don't have time to show you now, but that's awesome. So if I want to start up a new URL, I can just go ngrok. Now, I do have a pro account, so it's going to give me a custom URL. If you do this, you won't have that, but I'm going to go ahead and spin it up. And I'm going to paste this into the chat. And right now, you're going to see that this site is running on my local computer. It's my simple POC, stands for proof of concept. I've got my little joke API. Welcome. Here's a joke. Yay. Got some other things. It's just a quick down and dirty test site. But I'm showing you that if you go there yourself, you can actually see this yourself at home. And then when I started, I can see people are actually going to it. Hopefully you're not sending stuff you shouldn't be sending. But you'll notice that there's a little web interface on port 4040. If I go to that, in fact, let me just clear the request and start over here. And you can see people out there in internet land are hitting my URL and getting stuff. So how cool is that? And if I want to say replay this request, this API joke request, I can do that. I can see my headers, I can see my raw, I can see my banner, all sorts of cool stuff. Can you imagine everything in a Raspberry Pi? Yeah, you could. So now if I let me close other tabs. So if I go to my simple, I do get a joke. This is using my ngrok URL. And I got a joke. So you can see I'm calling it. Now, because you guys are spamming me, I'm going to go ahead and... Aha! None of you work. But I'm going to go ahead, stop that tunnel, start up again. This time, I'm just going to do a really quick basic auth. Username test, password is password. Same thing I did before, just with authentication. Now, if I go back to my site and I refresh, now it's going to prompt me for credentials. So what I said was test, password, and now I'm in. If I go to PostMan, I just make the call. I'm unauthorized because I don't have credentials. But if I go to my Postman request that has credentials, authorization, basic, username is test, password is password, make my call, and it works. So it's a very basic example of how to use authentication on your ngrok. Okay, so we're getting close on time. So now, question. Do you have any questions? Sorry, I talked a lot and showed a lot. Hopefully it was worth seeing all the stuff that I showed you, including my background, taking a header. But any questions in the chat? Nobody? Too much to digest. It is a lot. But it's cool. Hopefully, again, you're going to get something simple to take out of this. There's many things to take out of this. This is being recorded and it's going to be on YouTube, so you can go back and watch it again. Does anyone else have any questions? I will count to 10, and if not, we'll move on and wrap up. 1. Do you recommend insomnia? I've never used Insomnia. I'm assuming you're talking about the tool and not like not being able to sleep at night, because I have that too sometimes. I know some other developers use it. I don't really use it. Like with anything, if it solves a problem, use it. I like Postman. Postman solved lots of problems for me, so I'll still use Postman. Um, but try it out. Insomnia might solve a problem that might be a little lightweight, more lightweight, and easier to use. Then use it. So I cannot recommend or not recommend Insomnia because I haven't really played with it. But I can recommend Postman because I have played with that. Any other questions in the chat? Going once, going twice, going 3 times. So I'm gonna take a slow sip of coffee, and then when I'm done, that'll be it. Unless I see a question. Oh, the jokes data comes from external API. Yes, it does. Oops. Let me show you that really quick. I'll post it in the chat here. So it's just v2.jokeapi.dev. And I like it. It's just if I'm doing some testing, it's just a nice, fun thing to do for demos. And but yeah, that's the joke API. Where did I set up on Postman? I downloaded it to my computer and just installed it. So it supports Windows, Macs, Linux. There's even a web interface, which I did not show because I was kind of running out of time. But if I go so I'm logged in to my Postman account. If I go to my conference workspace, if I go to get a joke, set my environment. Hey, look, because I've got an account, I'm sharing my collection with the Postman Cloud. I was able to set my environment, send it. Guess what? I'm in a web browser and I'm getting all the same stuff. How cool is that? So now a big difference is if you're running a server locally and you want to test locally, then download the client locally and use it so you don't have to go out. This browser is hitting this is a public access. So because I hit the joke API publicly, it works. If I tried hitting a server internally 127.0.0.1, this would fail because, like, look, they're not going to know how to get to it because this is coming from the outside. But if I go to ngrok and it's using my ngrok URL and hit it, let me go. Apparently, I'm still in authorized mode and hit it. It works because it's going out through the public internet through ngrok to my local server. So, rule of thumb: if you're using a lot of public APIs, you can just do it all in a web browser. It's very cool. Save it up to get a Postman account. They've got a free basic account. Save your collections. I think after like 2 or 3 people on your team, then they start wanting you to pay for it. But if you're a solo developer, only have a couple of people, you can do that. And the ngrok tool handled the exported JSON file. So ngrok didn't do anything. Ngrok's just a proxy. ngrok takes the request coming publicly and relays it internally. So what was the exported JSON file was me exporting the Postman collection and then importing it back into Postman. But yeah, ngrok's just a relay. So that's what I'm saying. If I wanted to set up a database server, I could set up, my port 1433 for MySQL, I believe that is. You can connect and it all works. Now, coming from the outside, ngrok's going to give you a random thing, a random port, but still. ngrok is not an API manager. ngrok is a relay proxy. So you could put it in the middle of your API manager and something else. And a lot of companies use ngrok in production for enterprise layouts. When I was at a conference last year, one of the ngrok people were there and give a demo about how one client had like some old AS400 system that they had to access externally. It would have been such a hassle to get the infrastructure to wire it up properly to access it. They spun up ngrok, set the port up, and they got to it right away. I mean, how cool was that? Yeah, ngrok is basically a proxy relay. It sets up, it's the middleman between the middle person between the public internet and whatever you want it to connect to. And anything you connect to locally, ngrok can connect to locally. So if I'm running a server on a site on a different server internally, I can still run ngrok on my machine and just have it relay the port over to whatever my machine can get to. Okay, we are now 1 minute past. So just to reiterate, postman.com, webhook.site, ngrok.com. Those are the URLs you can use. A big thank you for coming out today. I hope that, like I said, you got at least one useful, hopefully more than one, but I said I don't set a very high bar, and so hopefully at least one. As always, my name is Daniel Garcia. I'm a senior developer at Orta Solutions. You can reach out to me, dgarcia at ortasolutions.com, linkedin.com/in/Daniel J. Garcia. And if you ever need anything like, enterprise level frameworks in Cold Fusion, hit us up for CodeBox. And even though I say enterprise level, you can still use it for the simple stuff too. CodeBox is awesome. You can do all sorts of things from very small to very large. Check us out. Or in Command Box. Check us out. Run any Cold Fusion server from a command line. It's that easy.